Alright, so we're going to be solving quadratic equations by completing the square. We're going to recall a couple things. So quadratics can be written in the form ax squared plus bx plus c, and then if it's an equation, it's going to be equal to 0. So we learned how to use the zero product property and how to solve in this chapter. But in this couple chapters, we're going to learn how to solve more ways. So one of the first ways to solve is the square root property. So that's if b is a real number and if a squared is equal to b, so if you have this format, then you could square root both sides and you get a is equal to plus or minus square root of b. So use the square root property to solve each of the following. Alrighty, so again, we're just going to go ahead and square root because it's in that format. It's x squared equals a number. So x is equal to plus or minus square root of 90. Okay, then we already learned how to simplify radicals, so we're going to go ahead and simplify this. So I can multiply this by 9 times 10, 3 and 3, 5 and 2. So we have a group of 3, and then inside we have 10. So this becomes x equals plus or minus 3 radical 10. Alright, then the next one. So same thing, it's in that format. It's something squared equals a number. So we're going to go ahead and square root both sides. Then you get x is equal to plus or minus square root of 32. So notice that I'm putting the plus or minus whenever I take the square root of something. And then we're going to go ahead and do a tree. So we could do 8 times 4, 4 times 2, 2 and 2, and then 2 and 2. Alright, so then I'm going to go ahead and circle these, and then circle these. And we're going to go ahead and write x equals plus or minus, and then the 2 and the 2 comes outside of the radical, and this one is left inside the radical. So x is equal to plus or minus 4 square root of 2. Alright, so this example here is use the square root property to solve 2x squared minus 14. So remember the format that we're trying to get it into is a squared equals b, or b is just a number. So we're going to try to isolate the thing that's being squared, so the x squared. So we're going to go ahead and add 14 to both sides. Divide by 2. Divided by 2, we get x squared equals 7. And then we're going to go ahead and take the square root of both sides. X is equal to plus or minus square root of 7. And that would be our answer. And you could still check all of these. You should be able to get the plug it into the original equation. So 2 times square root of 7 squared minus 14 equals 0. So the square root and the square cancel each other out. 2 times 7 minus 14 equals 0. So that's 14 minus 14. So yep, that does work. And then the negative one will also work. Alright, so next thing, we're going to be solving by completing the square. So the process of writing a quadratic equation so that one side is a perfect square trinomial is called completing the square. And within completing the square, we are going to be using the square root method. Okay, so example number 3 says solve p squared plus 2p equals 4 by completing the square. So what we want to do is on this side, we want to make it a perfect square. So I like to do p squared plus 2p plus blank equals 4. Now what happens when you add one thing to one side? I have to add it to the other side. And in order to make this side right here a perfect square trinomial, we have to add b over 2 squared to both sides. So b over 2 squared, we're going to be adding that to both sides. So remember that our format is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So the b is the number in front of the x, or in this case it's a p. So that would be 2. So I like to do that work on the side. So 2 over 2 and then divided by 2 squared. So this is going to give you 1 squared, which would be 1. So in that blank, you would be adding 1. So this gives you p squared plus 2p plus 1 equals 4 plus 1. Okay, then you're going to go ahead and factor the left and simplify the right. All right, so then if we factor this, this would be p plus 1 squared equals 5. So then now notice this is the square root property. So use the square root property. So we're going to go ahead and square root both sides. We need the plus or minus there. So we get p plus 1 equals plus or minus square root of 5. And then we're going to go ahead and subtract 1 to both sides. Now when you subtract 1, whenever you subtract or move something over to the other side, always move it in front of that plus or minus. So p is going to equal negative 1 plus or minus square root of 5, and that would be our answer. All right, so next one, again, we're going to be doing more or less the same process. So I like to go ahead and write it out. And if you notice, this one has a 1 here, so I want to move that 1 over to the other side. And this should be an x. Okay. So x squared minus 4x plus blank equals negative 1 plus blank. All right, so then you're going to do b over 2 squared on the side. So again, b in this case is going to be negative 4. So negative 4 divided by 2 is a negative 2, and then squared is 4. So you add 4 here, and then you're going to add 4 here. Then remember, you're going to factor and simplify. So this is going to give you x minus 2 squared equals 3. Then you're going to go ahead and use square root. So square root, plus or minus. X minus 2 is equal to plus or minus square root of 3. Okay, then you're trying to isolate the x, so you're going to go ahead and add 2. And remember, I like to place it in front of the plus or minus, so x is equal to positive 2 plus or minus square root of 3. And that would be our answer. And don't write it as a decimal. I do want to see it in radical format.